At one point, I remember being above my body and looking at us having this conversation. And then I went back into my body. And I don't remember this part because I felt like I knew everything in the universe. Like during this time, as he's in there and everything is so full of love and vibrating, I felt like I knew all the answers to everything. But when I woke up, most of that was gone. It was gone. When I woke up in the morning, it was gone. But my fever had gone down and they were bringing in more intravenous antibiotics. And I said, hey, I can have all of these, but I can't have this one. And I knew what it was because it was cold
You,
and it was
you,
wrapped in foil and it was the only
you
one.
knew it, right?
I knew it. And
Yeah.
I had never spoken against a doctor or authority figure, a nurse ever in my life. And I said, I can't have this one. It's killing me.
Hello, I'm John Brink and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And again, people say, we know where Canada is and we know where British Columbia is. Where is Prince George? Well, if you know where Vancouver is, beautiful city, we are about 500 miles north of Vancouver, right in the middle of British Columbia, big province, beautiful place. Today is a very special day. We have a very, very interesting and special guest. Her name is Bridget Cook-Burch. Did I say it correctly, Bridget?
Close enough. People call me Bridget. You can call me Brigitte. I don't mind that at all.
Okay. Bridget, and your clients call her the book whisperer, and she is a New York Times, Wall Street Journal bestselling author, a mentor, a trainer, a mama bear, a humanitarian, and a speaker known for her riveting stories about transformation. And I'm going to just continue with it because it's so interesting. Her powerful work has been showcased on Oprah, Dateline, CNN, CMA, the History Channel, NPR, and The People, among many others. She is the CEO and founder of YourSpireStory.com and inspires the legacy publishing. Bridget, welcome to the show. You have quite a bio, my goodness. Tell us a bit about your past, and then I see also some trauma happens along the way and something that triggered you into a different direction, same as me, and a lot of other people as well. So share some of it with us.
Certainly. Thank you. It's such an honor to be on the show. I've enjoyed watching you with others, and you're such an enigmatic host. So thank you for having me on today.
Well, thank you.
So, yeah, I think it would be great for people to know that I grew up in an adoptive home. I had 3 sets of parents by the time I was 6 months of age. But I had incredible adoptive parents. So I had 2 things going on. One was they were very supportive of my hobbies, my dreams. So I was an avid reader. My mother had been a teacher, and so I was allowed to check out as many library books as I could possibly want, which was very dangerous. But I also had kind of a big wound inside. I was always waiting for the big people to leave because by this time, 3 sets of parents, and I just thought I must not be good enough. I must not be smart enough or pretty enough or whatever, that they were always going. And so I didn't know that I thought that, but underlying there was that complexity there. So I grew up trying to prove myself, constantly made a lot of mistakes like most humans. But I also got to the point where I was working 3 jobs while I was going to college at a small university and trying to make ends meet. And I got very, very ill. So I don't know if you want to go into that right now, but the story.
I like that. Yeah, tell us about it.
Okay. So the story I had been telling myself up until that moment was just, I've got to push harder, I've got to be better in order to be worthy, to be worth something on the planet. And I developed some fissures and ulcers in my colon. So I was literally through stress eating myself from the inside out.
Wow.
And I got very ill. I lost 30 pounds in about 3 days, and I didn't have that much to lose at the time either.
How old were
And
you then, Bridget?
I was just in my early 20s, so I was
Just
about not quite 21.
such an important period in your life, right?
Hmm. Very formative. And so I went to see my mother, and she took one look at me, and she's, we're taking you straight to the doctor. When
Yeah.
I got there, I collapsed. And fortunately, it was right next door to the hospital. So they took me in, they did emergency surgery, and they found sepsis. Like my body was just full of infection. And so they pumped that all out. They put me on 6 or 7 different intravenous antibiotics because I was so emaciated I couldn't have, a normal IV. And so they put it in what's called subclavian near my heart, and they put me on all these antibiotics, and then they expected me to get well. But what they
You were
didn't know
lucky
is
to be alive.
yeah,
You know, the way it
yeah.
sounds to me, my God. So then what happened? You then did, what did they do then? So they help you
Yeah,
to stabilize you,
they tried to, but they didn't
right?
know that one of the antibiotics they were giving me I was allergic to. Never had it
Oof,
before, but it was killing me. So instead of
oof,
getting better, I kept spiking really high temperatures. They were
oof.
worried about, brain damage, whatever else could come with it. And my mom finally went home, and I was listening to 2 nurses outside in the corridor, and they said, you know what, I think we better call her mom to come back in here because she's just not going to make it until morning. So here I am,
Oof.
this young girl, you know,
In
thinking
the
my whole life is ahead of me,
prime of your life, right?
prime of my life, and I'm recognizing that I'm not going to be here. And and
Did
I
you realize that it was
Yeah,
at
when I
the
when I heard
edge?
those nurses, I was like, "Oh my goodness." And I had a roommate in the hospital, and she even said, "You know you're dying, don't you?" And I said, "Yes." And I was just so sad. But then I had this most incredible experience. It was what some people would call crazy, but for me, it was the most real experience I'd ever had in my entire life. I had a presence that came into my room, and there was a softer presence behind, but this incredible presence of unconditional love and light. And he began to talk with me and share with me, and everything in the room began to vibrate. Like I could see atoms vibrating, I could see my skin vibrating with his love. The metal tray table, I will never forget that. It was just vibrating with him, and I could see all the molecules. It was the craziest
What
thing.
what
And it was, go ahead.
yeah, what was it? Was it death being near, and was it something that happened, not religion? Was it has it something to do with something that you got close, and then it
Yeah,
sounds to me is
me, it was intensely spiritual, this
right,
love. And this figure to me represented Christ.
right.
And he began to have this conversation with me, and he let me know that I was being given a new chance at life. And that was so extraordinary to me because I didn't believe that I deserved it. And I certainly didn't believe that God or the universe or Christ or anyone would even know who I was, much less know who I was and come into my room and give me a second chance. And at one point, I remember being above my body and looking at us having this conversation. And then I went back into my body. And I don't remember this part because I felt like I knew everything in the universe. Like during this time, as he's in there and everything is so full of love and vibrating, I felt like I knew all the answers to everything. But when I woke up, most of that was gone. It was gone. When I woke up in the morning, it was gone. But my fever had gone down and they were bringing in more intravenous antibiotics. And I said, hey, I can have all of these, but I can't have this one. And I knew what it was because it was cold
You,
and it was
you,
wrapped in foil and it was
you,
the only
you
one.
knew it, right?
I knew it. And I
Yeah.
had never spoken against a doctor or authority figure, a nurse ever in my life. And I said, I can't have this one. It's killing me. And she thought I was crazy. So she's giving me these interesting looks and she doesn't know what to do. So she goes off to get the doctor. But fortunately, he'd had enough experiences with patients who also had had near death experiences, a sprinkle of them through the years. And he said, well, she's on all the rest of these antibiotics. We can take her off this one. And in the next 24 hours, I was able to leave the hospital on my own power. And so to me, it was very miraculous and extraordinary. And I
Did,
completely changed the story I was telling myself. Go ahead.
yeah. So this was dramatic that did they already then, did afterwards they realize that you were not taking well to that particular drug? Did he ever find
Yes.
out?
They just,
Yeah.
they completely took me off of it. And then they put in my files and other things that I was allergic to that drug. So that I would never have it again, which is good.
Oof. So then you started recovering from the near-death experience, and you were healthy, not overly healthy because you had lost so much weight. Then what did you do from that point forward?
Well, I'll tell you, there was the physical recovery, which honestly
Right.
didn't take very long.
No.
But the mental and emotional change was so profound. I
Right.
remember looking into the mirror in my bathroom, and it was the very first time I like looked in my own eyes because up until that point I felt like I wasn't worthy. So I would avoid looking in my eyes in the mirror. I put on makeup, but I just wouldn't. I couldn't look at me. And for the first time, I saw love there. And when I went out into the world and I would see a perfect stranger or someone who might have frightened me in my past. And all I could see was love there, creation there. It completely changed my world and the story I had been telling myself about me and what the world was all about. After that, I was not afraid of any human. So,
So it changed everything as you were before. So it gave you confidence. For one, you had not failed. You could be successful. And so then the road was open for you to do whatever you wanted to do. And then subsequently, obviously, as I read in the introduction, you had that. But what comes out to me is somebody that obviously has amazing experience that laid that foundation to what you would become, and then amazing experience that most people don't have or survived. And then from there on in, it gave you the ability to create that self-confidence, but also you became a humanitarian and wanting to give back or share with others that may benefit from experiences that you had. But also what I see is you became obviously an author, a speaker, and what is a mama bear?
it's the mama bear humanitarian. So
Yeah.
I love to watch over people, provide support and opportunities for their success. I don't believe in the stories of that someone's not good enough or that
Yeah,
they don't have enough support to do extraordinary things in the world. I now know we all do. We all do.
yeah. And I do a fair amount of public speaking and things like that. Had a bit of a background, not like you, but in different ways of trauma. Is that what I say now a lot of times? If I talk to younger people, doing presentations, I always go out of my way to say that so many young people in particular are critical of themselves. This is not quite right, that's not quite right, my clothes is not quite right. I always say, you are special. There
Mhm.
is only one of you on this whole world, just one. And you
Yeah.
are special, and that's how you have to act and conduct yourself, that you are special. All those other things do not make them the focus of you, but you as an individual are special, and I believe that is very, very important.
I
So,
believe so too. And I know you've talked with a lot of people who've experienced trauma. And I remember talking with Lisa Nichols. She was on The Secret, and she's well known for working with youth and others. But one of her things was your mess often becomes your message. And so I
yeah,
really love to talk with people about that because it's oftentimes like with me, I was embarrassed about life. I was deeply in debt. I was struggling with school and relationships. I was trying to do too much and not surviving.
yeah,
And so my life was a big mess. But then on the other side, to come out of that experience and recognize, wow, there is a reason I'm here. And at the time, I had no idea what it meant to fulfill the measure of my creation. I didn't know I was here for a purpose. And
right,
now I know everyone is here for a purpose. It's like what you said. You're extraordinary. You're an individual. It's like what 1 in 3.3 trillion that you're even here alive on the planet right now.
exactly.
And so yeah, I love that you spread that message as well.
So I was born in 1940, and so I'm going to be 84 this year. And
Congratulations.
well, thank you. I say 84 years young, and so and I'm quite into being an author as well. But I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I was born during the Second World War, the beginning of the Second World War, and we lived in the northeastern part of Holland, and within about 10-15 minutes from the German border. And my parents were married in 1938. They were in love and everything was perfect, and they had one son fairly early in their marriage, and then a daughter, and then I came along, the last one in late 1940. And then everything was beautiful, and then everything changed because the dictator Adolf Hitler and this invaded Holland and changed everything. So my dad then, I was not born yet, in May or April of 1940 was drafted into the Dutch army, and the last they heard from him was when he was caught at Rotterdam, when they bombed the whole downtown of Rotterdam, and they didn't know he was dead or alive for about 5 years. And so
Oh my
that was
goodness.
just my mom, and then the two kids first, and then I came along, and I still remember, it was tough going, and I still remember the winter, or the Allied forces invading, and then all the airplanes coming over Northern Holland in particular, as they were bombing the infrastructure of the weapons production in Germany. And we would see them, 300, 400 planes in the air. The sound of it, even now I remember as being 3.5, 4 years old. And then My mom would take us outside because on a flat deck behind our house, not to look at the planes, but she felt safer outside than inside. And in the distance, we could see the fires of the cities burning in the distance. And that was Bremen, Wilhelmshaven, all those places close to the North Sea. And then I remember the winter of 1944-45 was the hunger winter. And, you know, and it was the coldest winter on record. They had cut off all the food that would come to most of Holland. And we would go, my brother, my sister, and myself, every morning we would go with gunny sacks in the railroad yards and pick up anything edible and burnable. And then remembering, I still can feel now, nearly 80 years later, I can still feel the feeling of hunger. And then the other one, that's the cold, the immense cold, the coldest winter on the record in Holland. We had a little stove in one little corner of the house that we had the stove, and the rest was cold. And you know, and so I remember that part. And then on April the 12th, 1945, we were liberated by the Canadian Army, and we then saw formats that we should not have seen. It was quite rough going, but we were so excited about the liberators that I always knew that I would go to the land of my heroes. And I tried to go when I was 17, and my parents wouldn't let me then. Was drafted into the Air Force myself for 2 years. And then finally I left Holland and to go to the land of my heroes, Canada, now 60 years ago. And again, I was not a success story in school. You know, I failed grade 3. I failed grade 7 3 times. And I still had issues with PTSD, and I had also issues with the inner child, the little boy that was the fear of losing the one parent that we had. And got counseling for that actually well into my 50s, and very emotional. And but then you know, I always kind of felt that I was always a happy-go-lucky individual, and I was very industrious and selling papers and collecting bottles, and always kind of making money in my little way. And then I felt I had to start new again, you know, because after I failed grade 7 for the 3rd time, and friends said to my parents said, "What are we going to do with this guy now?" And he said, "Well, maybe send him to the mentally challenged school." Fortunately, they didn't do that. So he said, "No, we're not going to do that. We're going to send him, get him a job, a career that he can work with his hands." And so they got me a job in a furniture factory, and I loved wood. My dad worked in wood. My grandfather was a master carpenter. So at 13, I was working in a factory and became a furniture maker. And now kids, as you well know, can be sometimes very hard on each other. All the friends that I had that went on to college and university, they kind of looked at me. I became a laborer. I'm proud of that today, but then it was kind of looked down on. And so I wanted to start, you know, that I knew that I was just as smart as the others, not better than, but as smart. And I wanted to start all over again and then follow my dream of going to Canada. And then I had a dream. I wanted to build a lumber mill, but I wanted to start with nothing. I couldn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job. So in July of '65, I came to Canada. Now all the timber is in British Columbia, or a lot of the timber. I knew I wanted to go to the British Columbia, and then I flew into Montreal, took the plane across the railroad across Canada. 4 days, 5 nights. Oh my God, that's a long way. And so they then landed in Vancouver, went to the immigration department in Vancouver. And fortunately, there was a German fellow. I could speak some German. I told him what I wanted to do. He said, "Go to Prince George. That's a boom town. They're building sawmills, and so that's where I want." In the bus, 12 hours, and then I came off the bus. can still virtually see where the Greyhound station was, very close by our studio today, 60 years ago. So I came off the bus, couldn't speak the language, didn't know soul, didn't have a job. And then, I had my suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I counted my money at least 3 times. I had $25.47. But what I had lots of, Bridget, I had attitude. I always have had, even in the worst of times, I always a positive attitude. And then passion. Whatever I do, I give it 150%. And then the other one is work ethic. I work harder than anybody. And even now, at nearly 84, I still get up at 5:30 in the mornings. I always think I'm late, and I always make my bed, and I'm always in a hurry, and whatever happens during the day. And then I do a lot of stuff, so that's kind of how I started. And it's not about me, hurrah, hurrah, how successful John is, but about that starting from the bottom up as a clean-up person, and then kind of gaining that self-confidence that I didn't have at that time.
Right.
And even when I was already successful and built a mill and already got my business going from the ground up, starting with nothing, 3 people, and then gradually building it up, everybody used to say to me, "You're so successful," and I didn't feel that way, and even then I was still struggling with it. And then something happened that changed my life. And I went into a bookstore here, and I picked up a book, and the book's title was Driven to Distraction. I don't know why I picked it up, and it was a book about ADHD. I'd never even heard of ADHD, and I said, "Oh my God, that's me." And I wrote in the book in Dutch because I was ashamed of it. Now I finally know who I am. And, and so the more I got to know about ADHD, the more I started realizing that the frequency of occurrence is at least 8%, it indicated in Google and other places. And the more I got to know about it, then the more I found out it likely is higher than that. And the book, Driven to Distraction, was written by Dr. Halliwell. And he is quite an interesting individual. He wrote 18 books, 5 on distraction. He is ADHD, and he is also dyslexic. And it's Dr. Halliwell, very successful. And so he wrote a book in 1993. I bought it here in 1997, and pretty well wore it out going through it. And the more I found out about ADHD, the more interesting it was. Now, the interesting thing that happened is my podcast number 270, but 203 is an interview with Dr. Halliwell about ADHD.
Wonderful.
Can you believe it? And so there we were talking about it, and I said to Dr. Halliwell, other than discussions, and he had bought some of my podcasting because I mentioned it a lot of times, and I said to him that I believe that the frequency of occurrence ADHD is probably 20% or maybe even more. He said, "No, John, it's over 25%. I believe that." The other thing that he said, and I said to him, is that in my experience, that ADHD, the most successful entrepreneurs in the opposite here is successful, and the successful CEOs, more than 50%, I believe, are ADHD. He said, "No, John, more than 75%. And I agree with, yeah.
Oh my God. And so that just explains everything, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? And so what it did a couple of things for me, even up to the point, and that was in 1997 when I read the initial book. But right up to 1990, I was already here for nearly 30 years. And I still had 25 years at that point, but I still had problems with interacting with people. I could interact with people in my environment, but outside of that was difficult. And so
Mm.
then a sister-in-law that I had at the time, she said to me at one point, "Why don't you go with me to Toastmasters?" I said, "Toastmasters, what is that all about?" She said, "Well, that's where it's about communication skills and all. You will like it." And I said, "Is anybody going to ask me questions?" She said, "No, you just sit there and wait and then watch them." So I did that. And then in the middle of the meeting, somebody said, "Hey, John, tell us about you." I said, "Oh my God, I never go back here." And so, but I stayed for 10 years and then went to the highest level in Toastmasters, which is a distinguished Toastmaster, and it changed my life. But
Oh, that's fantastic.
for those people that are watching us, that Toastmasters is likely, there are Toastmaster clubs all over North America, but also internationally. And there are smaller
Hmm.
groups where they specialize in communication skills, but also to become good listeners, to be articulated, hopefully speaking on your feet, and probably at least as we speak, 450,000 people at least now are involved in Toastmasters around the world, but mainly in North America. And probably 10 million of them at some point were part of it. Probably less than 1% of it go through the effort going all the way to the top, which for me was critical, and it changed my life. And since that time, between the combination of all of those things, with becoming diagnosed at the age of 62, it's 57 when I picked up the book from Dr. Halliwell, but then it still took me 5 years before I went to my doctor that delivered our two daughters, and at the same time I was a personal friend, and he said, "Hey John, why are you here?" I said, "I think I got ADHD," and we checked out. Yeah, I do. So for a period of, and that's why I make the point, nearly, from the time that I was 62, from the time I was 13, for nearly 50 years, I was
Hmm.
not aware of the effects of ADHD on somebody and
Yeah.
attention issues. And obviously now people are becoming more aware of it. The frequency of occurrence, I believe, combined of everything is probably approaching 30%. And
Yeah. Or higher. And
yeah,
they've done some studies that correlate to trauma, early childhood trauma with ADHD, which you fit the bill as well. And so, as more people are experiencing complex PTSD, the ADHD sometimes comes along with it. And so it's wonderful, even though it took you a long time to figure it out, it's wonderful that you understand yourself better now.
yeah.
So
And then the other part about it, Bridget, was that then from there on in, as you well know, you're an author, you've written 7 or 8 books, I believe, maybe even more, is that a lot of people said to me already a long time ago, they said, "You should write a book about you have had such an interesting life," and all these other things. And then, writing books is not easy, and as you well know. And so I started, I stopped, I started, I stopped, and on and on and on. And then, so finally I knew if I didn't do it now, it would not happen. So I started working on the book. And the first one that I did is Against All Odds. And
I love that.
it's about John, not about how successful John is, but about all the ups and downs along the way. And more
Mhm.
importantly, and that became very, very important to me, being quite successful. Then the other one that I did, and I just want to share that with you, and then I want to talk about your being an author, but I know you're an author and you help people and who want to become authors, and then about all the steps along the way. So I had to kind of figure it out on myself, and then so the other part that I found was ADHD became so important to me that I wrote a book about it, ADHD Unlocked, and
Oh,
written
no.
by somebody with an ADHD mind. You can open it anywhere. You can either go that direction or the other. It's all interesting. And
Oh,
and
interesting.
Yeah. So, and then I did another one is that uh, I love what I'm doing, but a lot of people don't. And I heard
Mhm.
something on an American radio station, television station, that said 75% of people that work in the United States, I'm sure Canada is the same, don't like their jobs. And that
Yeah,
70% of
I
the
think the most
75%,
recent percentage was 80% don't like their jobs.
yeah.
So it's
And then,
gone up even.
and I'm looking for another job. So, and then same as young people saying, you know, I do give presentations in colleges, schools, high schools, and saying, I always say, okay, once you finish here, what career direction are you going to follow? And most of them say, I don't know. And I always say, you know, it would be respectfully worthwhile to check with some of the directions. You know, you want to be a truck driver, talk to a truck driver. You want to be a builder, a house builder, talk to contractors. They love to talk to you. Or if you want to be a doc, talk to a doc. Or you want to be a lawyer, talk to a lawyer and get an idea. Or you want to be an entrepreneur or a CEO or all people that may be interested. So I wrote a book about it. Finding your passion, living the dream.
I
The,
just
the,
ordered it. I'm so excited to read it.
Oh, I love it. I'm going to send it to you as well. And so, and then the other part is very important to me is that I had, at some point in life, as you already pointed out, and you were very, very young when you got close to that point that changed your life. And for me, it was in 2008 when I had a case of diverticulitis that ruptured, and so they have, and as you well know, likely is that you have a certain amount of time unless you do something about it and get to a hospital, and then it will attack all your organs. And so I waited too long, and so I got to the hospital, and then I came that close to they say, well, that's how close you were. It took a,
I was going to say, you're lucky to be alive, John. You're
I
lucky.
know, that's why I relate to you. So then after that, I knew what I had to do is that I had to, my wife is a vegetarian and had been preaching to me a lot, and I didn't listen as well as I could have, should have at that point. But then from that point forward, I did. And I knew I had to look at my well-being physically as well as in terms of diet. And I started going to the gym. I got a trainer with me because that gives me an appointment I have to go to. But before, it was one of the things that every year end we make a commitment. I'm going to do this next year, that, and I'm going to get a membership to the gym. Well, then 2 weeks later, then you find 100 reasons why you can't go. So,
Right.
and I did it in earnest. And after about 6 years of being in the gym, and already I'm in my 70s, somebody said, have you ever thought about competing? I said, me? And I thought, why not? So that's why I did. I started competing bodybuilding and physique. Came in second bodybuilding, third in physique in northern BC. Qualified me for the provincials. And provincials, I came in third and second. That qualified me for the nationals and the Arnolds. And then COVID came. Now again, I'm training again for going to the Arnolds when I'm 85. And I'm writing a book about it. So living young, dying old. This one is coming out next month.
Oh, I love it. Next month. That's wonderful. I'm going to have to get a copy of that one too.
I'm going to send them to you,
After,
Bridget. I'm going to sign
okay.
all of them. I'm going to send them to you. Anyway,
Oh,
so
thank you.
there we are. And I just want to give you some of my history because it reminds me so much, and that I knew from your bio that there were certain events that changed your life in a dramatic way, and that then put you at a place that, and I share that with you, is that where you want to share with others. My companies have been doing well. I have 10 different companies. I'm not bragging about it. I write books. I'm a very active podcaster. I'm doing a lot of presenting or being keynote speaker. And people say to me, how do you do all this stuff? I say ADHD. That's how I do it.
And you have a great team, which is wonderful. So you can be the visionary idea person
You can't
and
do it
dream all these.
alone. I always say you cannot soar like an eagle if you work with turkeys.
That's also a good point. So I'm sure that you only hire eagles instead of turkeys. I hope you guys are listening to that one.
So we have a lot of similarities, Bridget, and I love podcasting. It's still at the very beginning. Can you imagine? There we are sitting here, you on the East Coast, and I presume you are. Are you in New York in that area, or?
Actually, I'm not. I'm in the beautiful mountains of the West. So,
I like it, you know.
yeah.
So, but there we are sitting here, sharing our life and history and sharing with others. And in the meantime, we know already that globally, probably tens of thousands of people are watching us, and which
Hmm.
is absolutely amazing. And it's only on the beginning, I believe, of the power of these platforms and social media, how we can interact with the world is, it is amazing, really.
It is incredible. I was also thinking when you said, about because you've started your life over a few times. And after
I
your
have,
diverticulitis, I love that, you listened to your wife, you started eating better, you went to the gym, and then you began to compete. So here's this whole other life. I think that's beautiful.
yes,
My husband and I, we gained a little bit of weight during COVID because we were so isolated from
right,
everyone. And so we decided we were going to do something different. But I also talked to one of my authors who's a spectacular trainer of mindset as well as the body. And I said, I don't want you to treat me like an aging 50 something year old woman. I said, I want you to treat me like an athlete who's coming back. He said, you got a deal. And he put together this weightlifting and exercise regimen that knocked my socks off, but it also knocked 50 pounds off my body. And I felt so good, and I have been feeling so good and stronger. Now it's to maintain it, right? But
and
I love that you've had these different iterations of yourself. That's what I feel like is so beautiful about humanity is we have the opportunity to reinvent ourselves at any time. Usually we have to be pushed into it, a Mack truck, a diverticulitis, a something. But
yeah,
even today, it could be a podcast that you listen to and you say, you know what? I don't have to be the story I was telling myself. I can be something different. Oh, I was going to tell you, I had my whole life situation. And then all of a sudden, one of my authors gave me a DNA kit as a thank you gift. And she said, you're always telling us that we've got to dig so deep in our stories, but I don't think your book, your story is going to be complete until you do this. And
right,
John, I just have to tell you, I was completely terrified to spit into this little cup and send my DNA off.
yeah,
And even after I did that, I would look from time to time, but then I would avoid. But I found my DNA family, and I experienced a completely new iteration of myself, more understanding. I have
wow,
89 very close new family members. It's the craziest thing, but it's also incredibly wonderful. And to recognize that different people can have stories about you, ideas about who you are, but eventually it comes right down to what do I believe about myself?
exactly,
What is my origin story, but also what is the next step for me? What do I get to create or co-create on the planet? And
exactly,
and sometimes in opposition to or despite what someone says about us. And other times, when we hear truth and we can encapsulate that and use it and build it when someone recognizes who we are for what we are on the planet, and then say, you know
Exactly.
what, I'm going to believe that will be a part of the next chapter of my life. So I
Exactly.
learned that firsthand, and it was crazy because I've worked with hundreds of authors on these incredible stories, and then all of a sudden I was living another one.
So
So
how
I,
old
I
were
love.
you? I shouldn't say how old were you, but how long ago was it that you did that and found out your DNA and brought you to the roots really where you came from? How long ago
Yeah, it
was
was
it?
right before COVID. So
Oh my
just about
God.
4.5 years
So for
ago.
a long
So
time you did have no idea, and
yeah,
so it opened up that whole new world, because which is very important as well, right? Because of the history that you had gone through, and although you were lucky to have step parents or foster parents that were good, but still to feel your roots again is very, very important, right?
yeah, it was fascinating. I got to meet my birth uncle, and it was such a God thing because when we finally talked, I found out that he lived 7 minutes from me, and he is my birth mother's twin brother. But he
My
never knew.
God.
I'd been a secret for over 50 years. Like nobody
Oh
knew.
my
And
God.
so, and his wife is like, "Hey, do you want to come over?" But I remember when he opened the door and I looked into my own eyes because we have each other's eyes. And
Yeah.
then they showed me pictures of their daughters, and I looked like I could be one of his daughters. And they're my half cousins, but we look like we definitely look like we're from the same family. They look like they could be my sisters.
What
So I
an
had
experience, Bridget.
incredible. Yeah, I have an incredible adoptive family. They're my mom and dad. They're just
Sure.
amazing, and my siblings. But this grand adventure, and remember I was telling you about some of that wounding that a lot of adoptees have deep inside. I was able to let go of those stories too,
Yeah,
about not being good enough. And they told me
exactly.
what they had been through when they were trying to, bring me into the world. And it was like, oh, okay. They had their
Yeah,
own stories and their own
sure.
situations going on. And so my old
Yeah,
stories just melted away.
yeah,
Was really amazing.
yeah. So the other thing that I see in you is a lot that is similar to me. I'm a storyteller. That's what I do. If I write, that's what I do. I'm a storyteller. I'm a good speaker. Thank you to
Hmm.
Toastmasters and because speaking, being a public speaker is not easy. And a lot of people, in all the years that I was in Toastmasters, I've seen many, many, many hundreds of people that entered Toastmasters with fear and anxiety. But I
Hmm.
have never in all the time seen somebody like me as fearful about public speaking as I was initially when I went down there. Is that I and I'm writing another book on, I still don't have the title for it, I'm working on it right now, is on communications, and it will tell the story of when I first started, that I made a presentation about one of my companies. I had an opportunity to present to very influential politicians. I was very good at writing always. I was very good at numbers. And I had the opportunity to make this presentation. There must have been 8 or 10 people there of the best audience I could ever have for my arguments. And I sat in
Hmm.
front of them. I couldn't say a word. I
Oh,
could not
wow.
say a word. And I was so ashamed. And yeah. And
Well,
so
it's very real fear. I bet you will look up the statistics on that to put it into your. But I think it's
Exactly.
called phobia. But it people are deathly afraid of speaking in public, and
And so
so
that's
I'm
another
not
reason
surprised.
that, yeah, that's
Yeah,
another reason I want
plus
to
you
write
had
about.
the language barrier too, because English not being your very first language, although you're very well spoken. So I love that. And I love that you're always working on your next book or next two or three books. You're a very prolific writer. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and still a dreamer about saying, what do we do now? I love podcasting. I love interacting with people from all around the world about all kinds of different topics, and it's amazing. And then the other part, which is important to me, I fly a lot for my business. We do a lot of business in the United States, and
Nice.
always when I fly, and I'm a pilot as well, but I'm talking about commercial flights now, I always sit by the window and I look outside and it says paradise. It is paradise. And a lot of times I'm not sure. I grew up in a dictatorship that was devastating, and a lot of people sometimes think that wars, once the war is over, everything goes back to normal. It simply doesn't. It could be generations until it ever goes back to a sense of normal. Like in our family, it never got back to normal again. My
Yeah,
dad
you
that can
you're doing therapy in your 50s for some of that, and that makes total sense. Some people never go to therapy and they carry it for their whole lives. So I'm proud of
yeah,
you for doing the work.
yeah, so important. Yeah, males are not always well known to being uh, look like they're not tough and all the other things. I have no issue with that. So, but I believe it was very important. It was very important for me. And then the other part
Mhm.
that I say a lot of times is that that if we look around the world and all the things going on, how fortunate we are in North America, and look in the Ukraine, the Middle East, and then thinking about dictatorships. Like I grew up in a dictatorship where we were overran by Adolf Hitler, and it was devastating to the town that we lived in and all the people around it, and people that were dragged out of their houses and never came back. And
Mhm.
so and then the democratic system, both in Canada and the United States. Canada is boring compared to the United States, likely, but in any event,
Yeah, we won't get into the United States right now, but
but still, what I say, count ourselves fortunate that we have democratic countries, and that if I
yeah,
look at Russia, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, and on and on and on and on, we are so lucky and we are so fortunate. Yeah.
we are. I want to share with you. I wrote a book about a woman who was right here in North America, though, and she grew up in a cult, not knowing it was a cult because it's all she ever knew. But she ended up becoming the 19th wife of 65 women. And she was married to the prophet of an offshoot, an extremist cult of the Mormon faith. And the man who took over for her husband, because she was married very young, he studied Hitler, and he was incredibly manipulative. There are people who have disappeared and never come back. Fortunately, Texas and Utah and some others were willing to bring him to justice, but he destroyed more than 500 families. And I studied early German history, and I studied what happened in both world wars, and I studied Russian and so Stalin and Lenin and Hitler. But when you're talking about these dictatorships, they still happen when people don't open their mouths, when they're not willing to speak, when they stay in that culture of fear. So I was very proud of her. Her name is Rebecca Musser, and she was one of the few that escaped. And he sent what, four-state manhunt out after her. But she also had the courage she got away and was able to live a safe life, but then she had the courage to go back and be the face of the faceless and the voice of the voiceless for those
Exactly.
kids, because she knew what they were going to be facing. And
Yeah.
so it can still happen. It can still happen right under our noses, and it can be very insidious. So I think it's important for us to learn the lessons of history. So I'm delighted that you, as hard as it was, that you teach us, that in your storytelling you tell us what it was like, to be in Holland and to have these things happen, and the neighbors all suspicious of one another, and being forced into certain situations, and then what it was like for you to be liberated and to become part of your heroes. What an extraordinary story. I
Yeah.
think it's wonderful for us to learn that, dictatorships still happen. We have to be very careful of that level of leadership. We can't be gaslighted. We can't be
No.
manipulated. It's important for us to not cow to threats and to own our voices. And I
Exactly.
also love that the overcoming in a remarkable way, like you have done, is possible. So anyone can overcome a situation, a circumstance, but also inside of themselves. So
And be
I'm
at
glad that you're a
peace.
storyteller that
Be at
keeps
peace
writing.
with who you are, right? And then the
Yeah.
other thing that is important to me, Bridget, is that Remembrance Day is November the 11th every year, and during that week for the last 10 years, I usually try to speak at least 3, 4 different schools about, why do we have the 2 minutes of silence? What does it really mean?
Yeah.
Very important.
Mm, very important. I'm glad you do
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
the children have an idea, and they
Yeah.
grow up with the seed of that planted inside of them. Good for you.
Yeah. Yeah, there are not many left that were there at that time, but but it has been a very solid foundation, So,
Hmm.
Bridget, this was an amazing podcast, which I knew it would be, and I'm going to send you my books, and and then do the other one, this one, Living Young, Dying Old, and
Oh, yes. I'm definitely on your mailing list for that one too. Thank you.
So it was a privilege to have you on my podcast. I want to stay in touch with you, and then maybe I get Scott to make a note, and then maybe 6 months from now, so we can do another podcast, or maybe you have your own podcast as well, right?
I should. I'm a little too busy right now as
Yeah,
a
no,
publisher and other things, but I'm
yeah,
on quite a few podcasts every
yeah.
month, so
So,
yeah.
but we'll stay in touch, and again, it was a privilege to have you as a guest. And for those people watching us, subscribe to our podcast, share it, and comment on the podcast, because that's what makes people known around the world about people like Bridget and ourselves, and sharing it with all the people around the world. Thanks again, Bridget.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Take care.
You
Bye bye.
too. Thank you so much.